So I got married a little over a week ago, and I decided to make my wedding cake from scratch. The entire process from start to finish took me exactly 4 days. So I got married on a Saturday, and I started the process on the Tuesday of the same week, which in hindsight, being my own wedding planner, venue designer, stationery maker, cocktail batcher, and florist, starting the cake on the Tuesday before the wedding was kind of a psycho move. However, I am someone who thrives under chaos. So I think in the end, it kind of fueled me rather than hindered me. But here's how I went about the entire process. So on day one of making the cake, I made the actual cake layers. Our wedding cake was going to be an almond cake with a Grand Marnier Italian buttercream filled with apricot preserves, and I needed this cake to be big enough for 135 people. So I made 6 total 9x13 cakes and 9 quarts of Italian meringue buttercream. Now, a fun juicy little fact about Italian meringue buttercream is you have to start off by making an actual meringue, which will start off scorching hot, and then you slowly incorporate whipped butter. Now, if you add your butter prematurely, the butter will melt and it'll turn into like a goopy mixture. So my issue on day one was I could only make 4 quarts instead of 9 quarts because, simply put, I did not want to be making Italian meringue buttercream at 12 a.m. at night. So I went to bed, woke up the very next day, and started on the remaining half of my Italian meringue buttercream. Now, the other issue that I ran into was I randomly decided to use salted butter instead of unsalted butter, which is what I usually use, specifically for desserts and baking. So after making the first 4 quarts of my Italian meringue buttercream, I realized that it was a bit too seasoned. In other words, it was heavy on the salt. So while I was laying in bed on Tuesday, I placed a last-minute order for I think like 3 pounds of unsalted butter. So right when I woke up, I opened my door and the butter was there, thankfully. So I immediately got started on making the remaining 5 quarts of Italian meringue buttercream, except this time with unsalted butter. As you can see, I think for every single batch, I would add the butter a little bit prematurely. It would get a little bit goopy, and I would place it in the refrigerator and get started 20 minutes later. And since we had 0 time to waste, I would use those 20 minutes to do all of my DIY stuff, like cutting out the menus, writing thank you notes to our guests, all that sort of stuff. Anyway, once I finished my 5 quarts, I packed it up in my Cambros, packed up the rest of my kitchen to get going, and I drove 80 miles out to the farm. Now, for day 3 of making the cake, all I had to do was just assemble the actual cake, as well as add a couple of coats of Italian meringue buttercream. And lucky for me, I was working with a very tight deadline because my bridal shower was at 10 a.m., our rehearsal was at 4 p.m., and our rehearsal dinner was at 6 p.m. And I had to finish making our florals. So anyway, I started assembling the cake, which thankfully, because I had done several trials of this cake, it was, dare I say, a piece of cake. Just kidding. All I had to do was just add that Italian meringue buttercream, fill the cake with the apricot preserves, and shape it out / make it look decent. Because future me was going to finish the job on the day of her wedding. Now, once the cake layers were assembled and the initial coats of buttercream were added, I placed both cake layers in the refrigerator and got started on the rest of my day. Now, on the day of my wedding, I think I woke up at like 5 a.m. I had a bunch of other wedding tasks that I had to get done, but once I sat down to get my makeup done at 11, the wedding was at 4, by the way, my bridesmaids helped me pick out the sunflowers, take out the cake, clean the counter, whip up the buttercream. Like, I actually don't think I could have done it without them. But once my glam was done, and right before I got my hair done, I went into the kitchen and finished up the cake. To be completely honest, this was actually very therapeutic on my wedding day. Like, you have to remember, I love baking. Anyway, this was what I was going for. This is the cake that I had made in my trial a month before, and this is what I got. Now, if I had a couple more hours, I probably would have been a little more particular on the frosting job, but in terms of taste, it exceeded all of my expectations. Now, I was originally going to add a red string to signify the red string theory, but I ran out of time / I just did not have it in me to do that. However, once I got seated for dinner, my mom came over to me and she said, please don't be mad at me, but I added your grandparents' cake topper from their wedding in 1960. And considering they've been married for almost 64 years, I think the cake topper was 100 times more special. Anyway, the cake got demolished, the day was amazing, and the end.